In 1962, an architect named Eero Saarinen finished a building in New York that looked like a bird about to take flight. TWA's terminal at JFK curved concrete, sweeping staircases, a building designed to make you feel the romance of leaving the ground. People used to dress up to fly. It was an event, a ritual. You'd arrive early just to sit in the terminal and watch planes take off, the way people used to go to the harbor to watch ships leave. Now, walk into that same airport today, or any major airport in the world, and tell me what you feel. You feel like you're in a mall. Because you are. You're standing in a retail environment that has been engineered down to the inch to separate you from your money before you board a metal tube. And the wild part is, almost nobody asks why. We just accept it. We accept the maze. We accept the fact that the gap between the security checkpoint and your gate is now longer than a football field lined with duty-free perfume and $11 bottles of water. We think that's just what airports are. It's not. It's a business model, and once you understand the business model, you will never walk through an airport the same way again. Here's what we're actually doing today. I'm going to show you the exact financial mechanism that turned airports from transportation infrastructure into shopping centers with runways attached. We'll break down why the walk from security to your gate got so much longer over the last 20 years. And it's not because the airports got bigger. I'll explain the specific psychological tricks, the ones borrowed directly from Las Vegas casino floor design, that are baked into the layout of the terminal you're standing in right now. And most importantly, I'll show you why the people who run airports actually want your flight to be delayed. Not by a lot, just enough. This isn't about conspiracy theories or hating on capitalism. It's about the actual mechanical incentives that turned a place you pass through into a place designed to make you stop. Think of an airport terminal as a funnel, not a hallway. A funnel. You walk in one end wide open, full of choices, full of movement, and by the time you reach the other end, you've been squeezed through a series of choke points. And at every choke point, someone is trying to sell you something. The funnel doesn't care whether you wanted to buy anything. It only cares that you had to walk through it to get where you're going. That's the entire design philosophy in one sentence. You have nowhere else to go, so we control the path. Here's the number that explains everything. In 2000, the average major American airport generated roughly 15 to 20% of its revenue from what's called non-aeronautical sources, meaning anything that isn't landing fees and gate rentals paid by airlines. By the mid-2020s, that number had climbed past 40% at many large hub airports, and at some of the busiest international hubs, retail and concessions alone account for more operating revenue than the airlines themselves pay to use the facility. Read that again. At some airports, the shops make more money for the airport than the planes do. The planes are basically the delivery mechanism. You are the product being delivered to the stores. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because of a very specific financial squeeze that hit airports starting in the 1970s and 80s. Airline deregulation meant airlines could suddenly negotiate their landing fees down hard, playing airports against each other for cheaper routes. At the same time, airports were expected to fund massive infrastructure projects, new runways, new terminals, security upgrades, largely without direct government subsidy in a lot of countries. So airport operators, many of whom were now run more like private corporations than public utilities, especially after waves of privatization in the UK, Australia, and elsewhere, had to find revenue somewhere else. And they looked around and realized something simple. They already had a captive audience, millions of people a year sitting in one building with nowhere to go, often bored, often anxious, often with cash in hand. The airport wasn't just a transit hub anymore, it was real estate. Incredibly valuable, incredibly captive real estate. Here's the metaphor I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video. Think of the airport as a landlord who realized the tenants can't leave. A normal shopping mall has to compete for your attention. You can walk out, get in your car, drive to a different mall, or just not go at all. An airport doesn't have that problem. Once you're past security, you are, for all practical purposes, incarcerated in a beautifully lit, climate-controlled shopping environment for 1 to 3 hours minimum. The landlord knows this. The landlord has known this for decades, and the landlord has spent those decades systematically re-engineering the building to squeeze every dollar out of that captivity. So take the walk itself, the actual physical distance between security and your gate. This is not accidental architecture, it's a deliberately engineered retail funnel, and the person who essentially invented the modern version of it is a man most travelers have never heard of. His name is Nigel Rush, and in the late 1990s, Working for BAA, the company that ran London's Heathrow and Gatwick airports at the time, he pioneered what the industry now calls gate reassignment, or, less politely, the long walk strategy. Here's how it works mechanically. Instead of designing a terminal where your gate is clearly visible and close to security, airports began deliberately routing the walkway from security through a dense retail zone before you even see a single gate number. You don't just happen to pass the shops are placed directly and only in your path. There's often no way to bypass them. Try it next time you fly through a major hub. Try to find a route from security to your gate that doesn't take you through at least one duty-free shop or perfume counter. In a lot of terminals, you physically cannot. The architecture doesn't allow it. This is the same principle IKEA uses. You've probably noticed that IKEA doesn't let you walk straight to the exit. You have to follow the yellow arrows through the entire showroom, bedroom to kitchen to living room to marketplace, even if you came in for one specific lamp. Airports figured out they could do the same thing, except instead of a slightly annoying detour through a furniture store, it's a mandatory detour through a retail concourse you cannot avoid if you want to catch your flight. The casino industry calls a version of this the labyrinth effect. Vegas casino floors are famously built without windows, without clocks, with low ceilings over the gambling areas and soaring ceilings over areas they want you to walk toward, all specifically to disorient your sense of time and distance so you keep moving deeper into the building instead of leaving. Airports didn't invent this, they borrowed it. And once you know that, you start noticing it everywhere. The ceiling heights change right before you enter a big retail hall. The lighting gets warmer, more golden, more come sit and relax, right around the seating areas that happen to be surrounded by restaurants. None of that is random. Someone got paid a consulting fee to design exactly that effect. Here's why they want your flight delayed, not canceled. Delayed. There's actual industry data on this, and it's darker than most people realize. Airport revenue consultants openly discuss what's called dwell time, the amount of time a passenger spends inside the terminal after clearing security, as one of the single most important variables for retail revenue. And the correlation is almost mechanically linear. More dwell time means more spending, up to a point. A passenger who has 45 minutes between security and boarding might grab a bottle of water. A passenger who has 90 minutes might sit down at a restaurant, order a beer, browse a shop, buy a magazine, maybe pick up a gift they hadn't planned on buying. The data consistently shows that longer dwell times correlate with dramatically higher per passenger retail spend, sometimes 2 to 3 times higher for passengers with an hour and a half or more compared to those who barely make their gate, which means an airport, or more specifically an airport's commercial department, financially benefits when your flight is delayed by 20 or 30 minutes, not canceled, because a cancellation means you might rebook and leave the terminal, or worse, get put up in a hotel outside the building where you spend zero more retail dollars. Just delayed. Enough extra time to make you bored, hungry, and standing directly in front of a restaurant with nothing else to do. This is one of the quiet reasons why some critics have pointed out that airports have very little structural incentive to aggressively push airlines toward on-time performance, because a certain amount of delay is, from a pure commercial revenue lens, actively profitable for the building itself, even though it's a nightmare for the airline and for you. The math on what this actually means for your wallet is genuinely staggering once you add it up. A bottle of water that costs maybe 40 cents to produce and distribute sells for $4 or $5 at an airport kiosk. That's not a small markup, that's a 10 to 12 times markup. The kind of margin you almost never see in a normal retail environment, because normal retail environments have competition down the street. A sandwich that would cost you $6 or $7 at a shop outside security frequently runs $12 to $15 inside the terminal. Multiply that by the roughly 2.9 billion passengers who moved through U.S. airports alone in a recent full year, and even a conservative estimate of $10 extra in inflated spending per passenger works out to nearly $30 billion a year in what is essentially a captivity tax, extracted specifically because you have no alternative and no time to find one. Here's the part that makes it worse, and this is where the psychology becomes genuinely predatory rather than just opportunistic. Airport retailers know something about consumer behavior that most shoppers don't consciously realize about themselves. Decision fatigue and stress dramatically reduce price sensitivity. You've just gone through security, maybe taken off your shoes, maybe gotten randomly selected for additional screening, maybe rushed through traffic to get there on time, maybe you're anxious about flying in general. Your brain in that state is not running the same cost-benefit calculations it runs when you're calmly grocery shopping on a Tuesday afternoon. Researchers who study consumer psychology under stress have found repeatedly that people under time pressure and mild anxiety make faster, less deliberate purchasing decisions and are measurably less likely to comparison shop or question a price. Airports are essentially a stress-optimized retail environment. The security line isn't just a security line, it's a psychological pre-treatment that softens you up for the shops on the other side. Duty-free is maybe the single greatest illusion in the entire airport retail ecosystem, and almost nobody questions it. The pitch is simple. You're not paying local sales tax or import duty, so you're getting a deal. Sounds great. Except duty-free retailers, knowing that most travelers have no real reference point for what these products should cost, routinely price items at or above what you'd pay at a regular retail store anyway. Tax included. The discount is often smaller than the base markup they've already built in. You're not beating the system. You're being sold the idea that you're beating the system, which turns out to be an even more effective sales technique than a real discount because it removes your last psychological objection to spending money. Multiple consumer investigations over the years, comparing identical bottles of perfume or liquor at duty-free counters versus downtown retail stores in the same city, have found the supposed savings frequently amount to little or nothing once you account for the airport markup baked into the base price before any tax exemption is applied. The origin of this whole shift goes back further than economic policy alone. It's also a specific philosophical decision made by a small number of consultants in the 1980s who essentially invented the modern discipline of airport commercial strategy as its own profession. Before that era, airport management was largely an engineering and logistics function. You hired people who understood runway capacity, fuel logistics, air traffic coordination. Retail was an afterthought, a newsstand here, a coffee stand there, run almost as a courtesy for travelers rather than a profit center. What changed is that a handful of firms, many originating in the UK, started pitching airport authorities on a radical idea. Treat the terminal the same way a shopping mall developer treats a mall, with anchor tenants, sightlines, footfall analysis, and dwell time optimization, except with a built-in advantage no mall developer has ever had: a fully captive audience that cannot leave the building once they've committed to being there. The pitch worked because the financial upside was undeniable almost immediately. Airports that adopted this model saw commercial revenue per passenger climb by double-digit percentages within just a few years of redesigning their terminals around retail flow instead of pure transit efficiency. Once one major hub proved the model worked, every other airport operator on Earth had a financial incentive to copy it, and over the following 2 decades, they did, almost uniformly, which is why airports across completely different countries and cultures now feel eerily similar inside. The same layout logic, the same shop placement, the same forced walk, regardless of whether you're in Dallas, Dubai, or Frankfurt. Here's something that makes this even more deliberate than most travelers assume. Airport authorities don't just lease space to retailers and walk away. In a lot of major hubs, the airport operator takes a direct percentage of each retailer's sales on top of the base rent, sometimes called percentage rent, a structure borrowed directly from shopping mall real estate, which means the airport isn't a passive landlord collecting a flat fee. It's a financial partner in every single transaction that happens inside its walls. Every $4 bottle of water you buy, every $20 sandwich, every $80 bottle of liquor, the airport itself is taking a direct cut of that specific sale. This restructures the airport's own incentives from the ground up. A parking lot operator wants you parked longer. A hotel wants you to book more nights. An airport under a percentage rent model wants you spending more per minute inside the terminal. And every design decision, from lighting to seating to signage to the length of the walk, becomes a lever it can pull to increase that number. One specific case that made industry headlines a while back shows exactly how far this model can be pushed. A major European hub redesigned its primary terminal specifically to route arriving international connection passengers, people who had just landed from a long-haul flight and were trying to reach a connecting gate, through an enormous duty-free retail hall with no direct bypass route. Passengers connecting between 2 international flights, people who in a purely logistics-optimized building would walk the shortest possible distance between gates, were instead funneled through a shopping concourse specifically because that passenger segment, tired, disoriented from time zone changes, often carrying more disposable income given the cost of international travel, converts at a noticeably higher rate than domestic short-haul travelers. Aviation trade press covered the redesign glowingly. in commercial terms, celebrating the increase in per passenger retail spend. Almost nobody covered it from the traveler's side, the side where you've just spent 9 hours in a middle seat. You're exhausted, you have 40 minutes to make a connection, and the airport has decided the most efficient use of your remaining time is walking you past cologne and chocolate you have no intention of buying. Picture a guy named Marcus. To make this real, business trip, 3-hour layover he wasn't expecting because his connecting flight got pushed back 40 minutes, which then cascaded into a longer wait at the gate. He's hungry. He grabs a burger and a beer at a sit-down restaurant near his gate, $26. He kills more time browsing a bookstore, ends up buying a paperback he wasn't planning on reading, $14. He walks past a shop selling regional souvenirs, picks up a small gift for his kid, $18. He grabs a bottle of water and a protein bar before boarding, $9. Total unplanned spend, $67 on a trip where he thought he'd spend nothing beyond his ticket. Now, multiply Marcus by tens of thousands of passengers moving through that same terminal on that same day, most of them experiencing some version of the exact same forced idle time. And you start to understand why airport retail space leases for astronomically more per square foot than almost any other retail category on Earth. In some of the world's busiest hubs, prime terminal retail space has leased for figures that would make a Fifth Avenue landlord blink, because the landlord isn't really renting square footage. He's renting a captive audience with no exit. Here's the psychological trap the airport hopes you fall into, and it's the same trap that makes casinos and cruise ships so profitable: the sunk environment effect. Once you've already paid for your ticket, already gone through the friction of security, already committed hours of your day to this specific building, your brain starts treating the entire experience as a closed loop, almost like a vacation bubble where normal spending rules feel suspended. You wouldn't pay $15 for a mediocre sandwich at home, but you're not at home. You're in an airport, and airports have successfully rebranded overpaying as a normal, even expected, part of the experience. Nobody gets angry standing in line for a $9 coffee at an airport the way they get angry paying $9 for coffee at their neighborhood diner. The environment itself has become a permission structure for price gouging, and it works because we've collectively normalized it over 30 years without ever really questioning the mechanism behind it. There's a second layer to Marcus's story worth pulling apart, because it's not just about the money, it's about the specific sequence of small decisions that got him there. And this sequence repeats itself almost identically across millions of travelers every single day. It starts with what behavioral researchers call decision depletion. Every choice you make earlier in the day, what to wear, what route to take to the airport, whether to check a bag, how to answer the security officer's questions, uses up a limited pool of mental energy. By the time Marcus is standing in a terminal with an unexpected extra 90 minutes, he isn't making decisions with a fresh mind. He's making them with a mind that has already spent most of its discipline just getting him to this point. This is exactly why airport retail zones are positioned where they are, deep past security rather than before it. Before security, you still have your full decision-making capacity. After security, you've been through a stressful, depleting process, and every purchase decision from that point forward is measurably easier to influence. Now, overlay one more factor: boredom. There is genuinely very little to do in most airport terminals besides look at your phone or spend money, and airport design has quietly ensured this stays true. Free entertainment, actual comfortable public space with no purchase expectation attached, has been systematically reduced in most major terminal renovations over the last 20 years in favor of paid lounges and retail concourses. Aboard a depleted, mildly anxious passenger with nowhere comfortable to sit for free is, from a pure commercial design standpoint, close to the ideal customer. Marcus didn't fail some personal test of discipline when he bought that book and that souvenir. He walked through an environment engineered with real data and real consultants and real financial modeling behind it to produce exactly that outcome in exactly that kind of passenger. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but airports need this revenue to keep ticket prices reasonable, right? There's actually some truth buried in that argument, and it's worth being fair about it. Airports genuinely do use commercial revenue to subsidize landing fees, which does, in theory, help keep airline operating costs and therefore ticket prices lower than they'd otherwise be. This is the argument airport operators make in their own defense, and economically it isn't fake. Non-aeronautical revenue has, in a real sense, helped keep flying more affordable over the last few decades than a model that relied purely on airline fees would have allowed. So there's a legitimate economic trade happening here, not just a scam. But here's the thing that trade doesn't excuse. The airport isn't being honest with you about which side of the transaction you're standing on. You're not just a passenger paying for transportation. You're simultaneously the customer and the product, subsidizing the entire operation twice. Once through your ticket and once through the retail environment, specifically engineered to extract more from you once you're trapped inside it. Nobody tells you that when you buy the ticket. You find out when you're standing in line for an overpriced sandwich with 45 minutes to kill and nowhere else to go. The design details matter too, because once you know what to look for, you'll see this everywhere. Start with seating. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to find free seating that isn't directly attached to a restaurant or bar? This is deliberate. A lot of modern terminal redesigns have specifically reduced the amount of neutral, free public seating in favor of what the industry calls seating with a purchase requirement, meaning the comfortable chairs are now bar stools at a restaurant counter, and the free benches are fewer, harder, and placed in less desirable locations, often away from outlets and away from views of the runway. If you want to sit down comfortably and charge your phone, in a lot of newer terminals, your easiest option is to sit at a restaurant and order something. That's not an accident of urban planning. That's a monetization strategy disguised as furniture. Signage is another one. Gate information used to be displayed clearly and immediately as you exited security. In a lot of redesigned terminals now, you have to walk a meaningful distance, often through at least one retail concourse, before you hit the first big monitor showing your gate and boarding time. That forced ignorance, not knowing exactly how much time you have or exactly which direction to walk, creates a small window of anxious wandering. And anxious wandering is exactly the state in which people are most likely to duck into a shop, partly to kill time, partly because standing still and looking lost feels worse than moving toward literally anything. And then there's the walking distance itself, which has genuinely increased at many major hub airports over the last 2 decades, independent of the airport getting objectively bigger relative to passenger volume. Airport design consultants have written openly in industry trade publications about optimal minimum dwell distance, essentially calculating the ideal number of minutes a passenger should be forced to walk through retail space before reaching their gate, in order to maximize the odds of at least one impulse purchase without making passengers so late or so exhausted that they file complaints. There is, in other words, a documented sweet spot for how much they can inconvenience you before it becomes a PR problem instead of a revenue opportunity. And terminal design has been tuned to land right at the edge of that line. So how do you actually beat this? Because I'm not just here to make you angry at architecture. I'm here to give you a way to keep your money. Here's the protocol. First, eat and drink before security, not after. Prices outside the checkpoint in the same building are frequently 30 to 50% lower for the exact same category of food, because those areas still face some competitive pressure from businesses outside the airport entirely. The moment you cross that checkpoint, the competitive pressure disappears completely and prices reflect a truly captive market. Second, bring an empty water bottle and fill it at a water fountain past security. Nearly every major airport has free water bottle filling stations now, largely due to sustainability initiatives. And it's one of the few genuine loopholes left in the entire system. That's a $5 save every single time you fly, and it compounds fast if you travel often. Third, understand your own dwell time before you arrive at the gate. Check your actual boarding time, not just your flight time, the moment you're through security, and set a mental budget for how much idle time you actually have. Passengers who know precisely how much time they have make measurably more deliberate purchasing decisions than passengers who are vaguely uncertain and just wandering to kill time, because uncertainty is exactly the psychological state the terminal design is trying to keep you in. Fourth, treat duty-free pricing with real skepticism. If you actually want the product, whether it's a specific bottle of liquor or a specific fragrance, look up the price on your phone before you buy it. The airport discount story falls apart the second you have a real comparison point in your hand, and in a lot of cases you'll find the same item cheaper at a normal retail store back home. Fifth, and this is the big psychological one, recognize the sunk environment effect while it's happening to you. The moment you catch yourself thinking, well, I'm already here, as justification for a purchase you wouldn't normally make, that thought itself is a trap working exactly as designed. That specific rationalization, I'm already here, is one of the most reliable predictors of impulse spending in any captive retail environment, whether it's an airport, a cruise ship, or a theme park. Naming it when it happens is often enough to break its grip. There's one more layer to this, and it's the part that ties everything together and explains why this system is so hard to opt out of even once you understand it. The airport lounge. On the surface, a paid lounge or a credit card linked lounge looks like the escape hatch from everything I just described. Comfortable seating, free food, quiet, no forced retail, walk. But look closer at how lounges are financially structured and you'll see they're not actually a rebellion against the monetization model. They're the premium tier of the exact same model. Airlines and airport operators have realized that a meaningful percentage of travelers will happily pay, either directly or through an annual credit card fee bundled into a much larger financial product, specifically to be removed from the retail funnel they themselves helped design. In other words, the airport built an uncomfortable, disorienting, expensive default experience and then sold you a subscription to escape the very discomfort it manufactured. This is genuinely one of the more elegant monetization loops in modern consumer design. You're not just being charged at the point of sale for a sandwich, you're being charged often years in advance through a credit card annual fee for the privilege of not having to walk through the sandwich shop at all. The lounge isn't outside the system. The lounge is the system's most profitable room. There's a broader pattern hiding underneath all of this, and it's worth naming directly because it extends well past airports. Any environment where a person is physically captive, unable to easily leave, uncertain how much time they have, and mildly stressed becomes a uniquely profitable retail environment. And businesses have gotten remarkably sophisticated at manufacturing that exact condition on purpose. Cruise ships do it with layout and scheduled port stops. Casinos do it with windowless floors and no clocks. Theme parks do it with single entry, single exit, gated environments where the only food available is inside the gate. Airports simply happen to be the version of this that almost every working adult is forced to experience multiple times a year, whether they fly for business or pleasure, whether they're wealthy or budget conscious, whether they love travel or dread it. It is, in a very real sense, one of the most universal captive audience retail environments in the entire economy. And it's one of the few that almost nobody talks about in those terms, because we've spent 30 years being trained to see it as normal, even mildly glamorous instead of what it actually is, which is a beautifully lit, climate-controlled extraction funnel with a boarding gate at the end of it. Here's the identity level takeaway I want to leave you with. Every time you walk through an airport terminal, you are walking through one of the most carefully engineered persuasion environments that exists in modern commercial architecture, more deliberate in its psychological design than almost any shopping mall you'll ever visit, because a mall still has to compete for your attention and an airport simply doesn't. The building was not designed primarily to move you efficiently from the door to the plane. It was redesigned over the last 3 decades, layer by layer, consultant report by consultant report, to convert the unavoidable friction of modern air travel into a revenue stream, and it succeeded so completely that most of us walk through it every year without ever once questioning why the walk feels so long, why the seating feels so scarce, or why we somehow always end up spending $60 on things we never planned to buy. None of this means you should feel powerless in it. Once you can see the funnel, you can walk through it differently. You can eat before the checkpoint. You can fill your own bottle. You can notice the moment your brain reaches for, well, I'm already here, and choose deliberately not to finish that sentence with a purchase. The building will keep doing what it was designed to do. That part isn't going to change, but you don't have to be the passenger it was designed for. Here are your 3 takeaways. 1. The layout of the modern airport terminal is not neutral architecture. It is a monetization system built on captive dwell time. And every long walk, every scarce bench, every delayed gate announcement is doing quiet financial work on the airport's behalf. 2. The psychological tools being used on you, disorientation, stress-reduced price sensitivity, and the sunk environment effect, were largely borrowed directly from casino floor design, and recognizing them by name is the fastest way to disarm them. 3. The fix isn't avoiding airports, it's timing your spending around the checkpoint instead of inside it. Because the moment you cross security, you've walked out of a marketplace and into a monopoly. Next time you're standing in that terminal, waiting for a gate number to finally appear on the screen after a suspiciously long walk through a hallway lined with shops you didn't ask to see, you'll know exactly why the building is built the way it is. And that alone changes the entire experience, because the one thing this whole system depends on is you never noticing it's a system at all.